you very much, everybody, for joining. As Jonathan said, if you've got any questions, just pop them into the chat, and he will, direct them to me at an appropriate point, or as they come up as well. Today, we're going to be talking about podcasting. Is it right for my business? So I thought I would start off with who am I? And I am an original product of Canada. I was born in Canada. I was very fortunate, and I grew up in this top screen that you can see. I grew up in a lovely place called Penticton, which is one of the, I don't know if it's the only city in the world, or at least one of the few cities that is actually on two lakes. So this is one of the lakes. There's another one at the other side of the town, and as you can see, it's quite an arid, so it's not what most people expect of Canada. It's a very hot area compared to some of the other regions. Then I moved down to Vancouver, and Vancouver is absolutely lovely. At that point, I discovered that actually I was not only Canadian, but I had a British citizenship. And I decided that maybe I'd like to just wander over, and I really did just wander over to England, as you might guess by the fact that I'm here in England. So arrived in England, I did a bit of traveling, and then I started moving into project management and really settling into, I guess, the work life, and what my life was going to be, as opposed to just this kind of wandering around that happened initially. So I was a project manager for about 20 years. At some point fairly recently, I started to borrow a dog who, as you can see, is somewhat fond of mud. He's great at finding mud at any opportunity, even if there's nice clear water next to it. And I also decided to stop contracting and to start my own business. Now, that business started off being actually based around project management and planning, but I don't think my heart was really in it. And at some point, I decided to start a podcast. And this was another fairly laid back kind of approach of, oh, I think I'll start a podcast. Why not? And from there, I was actually discovered that I really liked it. And I really liked everything I'd learned about it. And I'd learned a huge amount about how to podcast and what it takes to do podcasting, as well as the mediums of getting it out there and all of those sorts of things. So as you can see here, there's lots of equipment you can have. Interviewing people. The dog, as you can see, is a constant. He's here as well, but snoozing at the moment. And that really led me to where I am today. And it was actually Mandy, who's pictured here, who said to me one day, she said, Deborah, have you thought about teaching other people to do podcasting? And I said, well, actually, no, I hadn't. And it was from there that I actually became the podcast launcher and the podcast concierge. And that's where I am now with my business. So while as many of us, we have various streams of things that we do, the main focus is on helping people to start their podcast, to keep their podcast going, and to really try and make the most of it. So as you can see, Canadian all the way through, but British, and some of my so-called friends like to tell me that now that I've been in England for longer than I was ever in Canada, that maybe I'm not so Canadian anymore. I do my best to ignore them. So I'm going to go on to podcasts and the story so far. Now, what would be great is if into the chat, if you could just pop in a note to let me know, do you have a podcast? Do you listen to podcasts? Do you know what a podcast is? Because everybody I speak to is different. And some people feel they ought to know what they are, but they don't necessarily still know what they are, which is absolutely fine. Because if you haven't, come across one, there's no reason why you would know. But while they seem relatively new, and they've been, in the past 2 to 3 years have really come to the fore of our minds and what we're saying and thinking about, they've actually been around for about 16 years. They're part of, the iPod. So when that iPod first came out, that was really where podcasting came from. They are about the audio. Now I'll hear people say, oh, but they're a video podcast and there are all of these other things. But at their core, the purest element of this is they're about the audio. More and more people are listening every year, and this is across every age group. It doesn't matter, you know, young, old, the numbers are increasing. There's been a bit of a dip right now with the coronavirus and the pandemic, and that's because a lot of people listen when they're actually commuting. And of course, the commuting time has gone down. But that doesn't change the fact that people also listen while they're doing other things. They could be walking the dog, out for a run, washing the dishes, going for a drive. And one of the things about them is that you don't have to be tied to a screen. You're not sitting there thinking, okay, well, hang on, I've got to get my phone out and I can only look at that. And the retention policy, the retention of attention, which is quite difficult to say, is really high. So compared to a video where you've quite often got a very short attention span, that people, you know, they look at it for just a few seconds, and sometimes it is seconds, and then they're off to something else. With podcasts, people listen to the whole thing. So in general, you'll find that people are focused on it. And I think it is because they can be doing other things at the same time and they're absorbing it. The other thing about podcasting is using your voice, and the voice is a really powerful way to engage your listeners. There's something about just hearing people that is different, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But what a podcast does as well is it builds that connection between you and your listener. And it helps you to build your authority and that expertise around, you know, people think, oh yeah, actually he or she, they know what they're talking about. And because they're listening to you and you're literally in their head, they start to know, like, and trust you. As with everything, some people won't like you. But that's fair enough. You probably don't like everybody either. So it starts to weed out the people who aren't interested in you, the people who you don't have a connection with, and to bring in the people that really do like what you have to say and the way that you put those messages across. And they increase your visibility. So it's one way of, again, expanding your brand, expanding people's awareness of you, and it's not bounded by your physical location, which is a really great thing. I can see on here that we've got some people who know a little bit about it, some people who are very, very into listening to it, some who are thinking about what it will be about, but can't think on the subject. And another person saying pretty much the same thing, that they thinking about it, but not sure of the topic. So I'll come on to some of that in a moment as well. Now, I was saying, trying to go a little bit faster because we're a bit shorter on time. If we run out of time, as Jonathan said, we'll look at you know, how I get as much information to you as we can, whether that's another podcast, another webinar, or whatever we need to do. So finding podcasts, so for those of you who don't know very much about them, the easiest way to find a podcast is to go into your browser and type in a topic that you're interested in and stick the word podcast onto it, and then just search. And Google will show you a whole list of podcasts. Some of them you'll find are repeated because they appear on different podcast apps. Some of them won't be, but they'll give you a whole list. And the example that I typically use are tractors, because somebody was saying to me, oh, well, what can your podcast be on? And I said, oh, well, anything, you know, really whatever, you know, you want to talk about, except maybe tractors. And then I thought about it some more and I thought, no, let's face it, there will be tractor podcasts out there. So I did a little search, and sure enough, there are podcasts on tractors, because everything has its own niche. It has its own market and its own group of people that want to listen to it and to talk about that subject, in the same way that we see TV shows on fishing and house building and all sorts of things, which appeal to some of us, but not necessarily all of us. So that is the easiest way to find a podcast. Most phones these days will have a way of listening to it. So if you're on an iPhone, there's the podcast app. There's also on Google, there's Google Play. I don't have an Android phone, so I don't quite know how you access that. But the one that covers all platforms is Spotify. So it's a nice, easy way to get in and just go in and search for podcasts, look for a topic that you might be interested in. And when you're starting to listen to them, bear in mind that you might not like the first one you listen to. It might be too long. It might be, you know, that the person has an irritating voice. It might be that the style doesn't suit you. But don't give up right away. Try a few different types. And just see which ones are a good fit for you. And they don't have to be about work either. They can be, you know, about stories. They can be educational. All sorts of things. There's a big market, I suppose, in serial crime. So for some reason, crime stories are really big on podcasting as well. So just go and have a look and see what it is that might actually appeal to you if you haven't been listening to them already. So I'm going to move on to the power of voice. And the power of voice is something where it's really easy to not appreciate how powerful it is. And what I'm going to ask you to do, and obviously I've got no way of knowing if you're doing this or not, but it is to ask you to close your eyes and just listen to me for a moment. Because as you're listening to somebody, you start to notice the pitch of their voice. You notice as they go up and they go down, and you notice how they might start to get excited about something and, you know, really a bit more, you know, animated and maybe a little bit slower. And because you're no longer having that visual aspect of it, you're having to pay more attention to what they're saying. And you quite often pick up little nuances, you know, that little catch in the throat. If somebody's upset about something, you just pick up a little bit more about that person. So if you did close your eyes, please feel free to open them now. But it's something I normally do a fuller exercise on this, just because it tends to amaze people on just what a difference it makes when you're just listening to the voice and all of those other distractions have gone away. The other thing that happens with the power of your voice is you open things up to people's imagination. So when I talk about the dog, you all probably do now have a picture of the dog, Woody, because you saw a picture of him. But if you hadn't seen that photo of him, you all would have had your own image of it. And it kind of frees people's creativity and imagination while still tying them to the story that you're telling them, the message that you're trying to get across. So the voice is an incredibly powerful tool. And we see that through the fact that audio, through podcasting, radio, still lives on and is, you know, abundant despite the availability of TV and movies and all of these other ways of looking at things visually. One of the challenges that you get when you're doing this is to speak to yourself. And what I would suggest you do if you're thinking about starting a podcast is that you take yourself off somewhere and you just try talking to yourself and realize how difficult it can be. It's also difficult on webinars where you can't see people and you can't see their interaction with you. And so what you have to do is you have to picture in your mind who you're speaking to. And if you tell a joke, you just assume that everybody is laughing uproariously at it. Can't say that word apparently. So you just have to work on that person that you're speaking to in your mind's eye and engage with them and assume that they're reacting in the way that you want them to react, and not to feel silly about it or uncomfortable. Don't worry about what your voice sounds like. It's the same voice everybody hears all the time. You're the only one who's surprised by what it sounds like. And just do some practice, get over it, and you know, just work at it if that's an element that worries you. So, sorry, I realize I'm racing through this. So do ask questions if you've got any, and I'll slow down as needed. So this is really critical. And I know we had a few people saying that they're thinking about a podcast and not sure what to do about, what topic they should have. In addition to your topic, you need to know why you're doing it. And this is really critical. It's the same as you probably find with your other marketing and things like that. Knowing why you're doing it makes a huge difference. And with a podcast, it's extra important because it does take time and energy. And if you're not sure what you're looking to get out of it and you don't know what your success point is, then you might find that actually your motivation and your energy for doing it starts to diminish, that you start to go, oh, can I be bothered doing this? Does it really matter if I put it out again? And if you know why, you can go, yeah, actually, I do want to put it out again. Yeah, actually, there is a reason for doing this. And I know it might be a slow burn. I know it might take a while before I get, followers on a regular basis, but I know what I'm looking to get out of it. And without that why, you're much more likely to give up. There are something like 1 million podcasts, I think, on Apple at this point. So Apple is still the main central repository of podcasts. So that's shifting. But a lot of those podcasts are no longer live because people basically just stopped doing them. And they stopped doing them because some of them will have come to a natural end where they said, okay, yeah, that's the finish. But some will have just faded away because people didn't keep it up for whatever reason. So it's really important to do some of that background work on your podcast. So what would your podcast be about? So for those of you who are thinking about it, is really sitting down and thinking about, why am I doing this? What is it that I want to get across and to get out of this to make doing this podcast worthwhile? Because I'm going to spend time recording it. I'm going to spend time editing it. I'm going to spend time, if I've got guests, I'm going to have to get those guests lined up. If you don't put that time in, then you might be paying somebody to do that. So it's going to cost you money. But one way or another, it's going to require this effort for you to do it. So thinking about what you want to get out of it, and then thinking about who you're talking to and why they're listening to you, will help you to think about what it is that your podcast should be about. So for example, if I said to you, well, I am a dog groomer, and you'll notice all my examples relate to dogs, so apologies. But I'm a dog groomer, and I'm going to do a podcast, and I'm going to tell you about how if you come to my shop and you book your dog in for grooming, how wonderful it is and how we care for the dogs and how great the dog will feel afterwards. That's not really going to attract you. That's not really going to get an audience who are going, oh yeah, I must listen to her talk about her dog grooming shop again. It's kind of like, I don't watch TV to watch the ads. The ads are just there in between the actual content that I want to listen to. So really be thinking about how you can make your content and your knowledge and your expertise something of interest. And typically that means that you're going to be able to not be able to, that you're going to give away some of your expertise. You're going to give that away for free, because that's how people are going to start to know, like, and trust you. They're going to start to recognize that you know what you're talking about, that you can, share and tell them how to do it themselves. Some of them will decide it's not worth the time and effort for them to do it themselves and will come to you. Some will do it themselves, but tell other people about you. So your influence will start to increase as well. So really thinking about who you're talking to, why they're listening, and what it is that you want to get out of it will help you to decide what your podcast's about. And remember, there's an audience for everything, and you don't need an audience of millions. You just need an audience that makes your success happen. And your definition of success is absolutely key. You don't need to be defined by somebody else's. So if your definition of success is that you are the podcast on everybody's lips and everybody's talking about it, then you're going to need to think about, how am I going to achieve that? Do I have that audience already waiting and crying out for me to talk to them? Or am I going to have to build that up? How long is that going to take to do it? But if you're just trying to increase your reach and you're trying to expand your, again, authority, you don't necessarily need a lot of people. If you only speak to 10 people a week at the moment and suddenly you're reaching 15, you've increased by 50% already. So the numbers themselves don't matter. And it's really important, in my view anyway, to get that into your mind, to think, yeah, actually, this is what my success will be. And may not be the same as somebody else's success, but that doesn't matter. And that's true of business in all aspects as well. I can see somebody has asked, is it our podcast mainly done in an interview style? And not necessarily. They can be solo, they can be an interview style, they can be a magazine format where you've got a number of different things happening as you would in a magazine. So it might be an interview and then a little blurb about something else. They can be really any format that you want. And sometimes people ask me as well is, you know, oh, well, surely that must be visual and it wouldn't work if you didn't have video. But again, the sounds that you can put into it. So if you were doing something like, I don't know, a pottery lesson and you had the sound of the potter's wheel going round, just those different noises actually evoke people's imaginations and ideas of what you're talking about. And it's surprising what you can do with just words and the audio without needing to show the visuals of everything. So it's really up to you, the format that you do it in. It doesn't have to be anything. I now do a mix. I started off with my podcasts. They were initially interviews, and it took me a little bit to sort of build up the confidence to go, yeah, actually I can do just something with me talking. And now I do a mixture of them. Some are full-length interviews, some are little snippets of interviews that I've put together, some are just me talking, some are currently, a lot of them are recordings of the webinars that I've done as well, because that's a nice conversation with people. So another question that I get asked on a regular basis is, how long should a podcast be? And people tend to think that I'm being a little bit coy or awkward when I say it doesn't matter. But the reality is, it doesn't matter. So coming back to that statistic about people listening to the full length of a podcast, they listen no matter how short or long it is. So if you've got a topic that somebody's interested in, the odds are they're going to just listen to the whole thing. So my recommendation is make it as long as it needs to be. If it takes you 5 minutes to get your message across, take 5 minutes. If it takes an hour, take an hour. Again, the other thing that I hear is people go, oh, well, it should be the length of a commute. But, you know, my commute when I was going into London was about, I think it was about 1 hour and 3/4 if everything went perfectly smoothly, which it never did. Somebody else's commute might be 5 minutes. So just find the length that's right for you, and don't put artificial boundaries on it. Don't go, actually, I can only talk for this long. It can only be this length. And if you do find that you've got a normal length, so for example, my podcasts, when I'm interviewing somebody, are typically 40 to 60 minutes. And actually, I don't think, apart from the very first one I did, I think that was the only one that was less than 40 minutes. So very rare to be anything below that, sometimes more than an hour. But generally 40 to 60 minutes is about right. And I just go with the flow because I'm having a conversation. Some will be longer, some will be shorter. If they're particularly long or short, then I let people know up front when they're listening to it so that they know what to expect. So it's about saying, actually, there aren't rules in here. It doesn't have to be a set time. It's not like TV where I go, okay, well, I've only got half an hour and I've got to slot 3 ad breaks into it. No, whatever is the right amount of time so that you're not rushing it and you're not padding it to fill out, again, an artificial boundary on how long it should be. How often do you need to do it? Now, this one is where you have people, a mixture of responses, I suppose. Ideally, you would do it at least weekly, and you'd put it out, you know, every week, same time. People get to know it. It slots into their schedule. It's much easier to think, oh yeah, every Monday, I know that there's going to be a new podcast waiting for me. But this comes back to the realities of the time and energy that it takes for you to get into this. So if you really can't put that time aside to do it every week, don't commit to doing it every week. You know, do it every 2 weeks, do it once a month, do something which is realistic for you, but bear in mind that you'll need to actually then do more promotion about it, because I'm much less likely to remember that it comes out on the second Tuesday of every month than I am to remember that it comes out, you know, every Tuesday. So think about what's going to work for you. And again, it's better to start less frequently and increase when you get into the flow of it and discover that you could do more. You can also do bulk recordings, so you could do a whole bunch of them and then release them gradually, which is a great way of doing it. But again, my general view is don't get too hung up on the rules per se. Do what's going to work for you, and that's going to allow you to get the message you want, to achieve the success that you want to achieve, and to also be sustainable. I can see that somebody has asked, what is the best place to let people know that you've started a podcast? Everywhere. So put it on Facebook, put it on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. If you've got a mailing list, mail them, tell them about it, maybe ask if they're interested and want regular updates. So really just, you want to get it out there as much as possible. And unless it's very time sensitive, you want to keep doing that. So once you've released an episode, just keep telling people about it, because it doesn't matter if they listen the day after it was released, or 6 months after, or, a year after. So as long as, you're promoting it, then it starts to, again, get into people's minds and their way of thinking. So yeah, promote it everywhere. And if you're doing it less frequently, promote it more. Strangely, you can also promote it on YouTube. And this is where the audio bit becomes a little bit not audio. So you'll find that people talk about video podcasts. And this for me was a bit of a kind of brain twister, because I think about, it's a podcast. It's all about hearing. Why are they putting video onto it? So there are a number of reasons around this. So one, YouTube is, I think, the second biggest search engine. So there's a real advantage to being found on YouTube. Some people still prefer to look. So while you've got this huge audience of people who want to listen to your podcast, some people would prefer to look at something still, and also would just go to YouTube. They might not search the other areas. So by putting it onto YouTube, that allows you to reach that other part of the audience, and also to be, being found on searches, that sort of thing. The type of video that you do is completely up to you. There are a number of tools out there that will convert your audio into sort of waveforms, where you see those little lines going up and down as somebody's speaking. So it'll convert it into that. So it's a little bit more visual and a little bit more easy to have on the screen if you're watching it as a video. You can also, I quite often do my interviews on Zoom. So I record that, obviously, because I need the audio as much as anything. But by putting that out there as a little video as well, that allows me to, have people seeing us as we talk. Now, some people go a step further, and I have seen some who essentially have multiple cameras, and people are sat up and essentially in a studio, sort of seated across from each other. And to me, that's starting to get into the realm of TV, because suddenly you're having to think about camera angles, and you're thinking about all sorts of other things. You're not just thinking about the conversation, the topic, whatever it is that you're covering in your podcast. But it can be on video as well, and promote it as many places as you can. Jonathan, I'm conscious that we're at sort of the 5-minute mark. Do you want me to keep going? Is there anything that you'd like me to focus on?
Yeah, I mean, yes, obviously time is tight, because obviously we were starting so late. Well, have you got some material? Certainly would be good to have some sort of, practical steps in terms of, either what is some of the basic investments you need to make in it, and what a little bit is the process from start to finish. I mean, what I'd say is that if we aim to sort of run till about say 10 past, another 15 minutes.
Okay.
And let's see what we can get into there, because as I say, I'm mindful, obviously people have set aside that time, and
yes,
don't want to just drift on with it.
Yes. That's fine. Okay, so coming to the costs and things associated with it, as you might have seen, I flipped through a few other slides there. It doesn't have to be expensive, and I'm all about trying to make sure that when people do this, especially when you start, that you spend an appropriate amount of money. And for me, what that means is that you don't need to run out and, sort of refurbish a room or a cupboard in your house and soundproof it and have the most amazing kit, because you don't need it, basically. You might want it, or you might want it at some point in the future, But when you start, I would just start with the basics. So I'm going to move on and just talk about the tech side of it to begin with. And what you need is a microphone. Now, a microphone on your computer or on your phone are generally not good enough. Now, everybody has a different perception of what good enough is. But if you're finding that there's lots of buzzing or crackling, people aren't going to listen, because it is quite painful on the ears. Because again, remember, people are listening right, you know, they've got earbuds in or they've got headphones on, so that it exacerbates those sounds if they're right close to you. So I would go with something like either a lavalier mic. So I'm just checking whether I have one up here with me, but I don't. And a lavalier mic are the ones that you see on TV all the time. You know, they're the little ones that just clip on to, well, your lapel. And they're actually great. They're really portable. They're able to, you know, I have two that are always in my handbag, so I can interview or record at any point if I want to. And if you get a reasonable quality one, they do a fantastic job of pushing the background noise into the background. So I've actually used them to interview in a conference setting where we were at a conference and on a break. So there was a huge amount of noise all around us, but you can still hear on the recordings very clearly myself and the people I was interviewing. The rest of the noise just fades into the background. Obviously, if there's suddenly something which is really powerful, that will interrupt, but for the most part, it blocks them out. And you'd be surprised at the noises that do distract compared to the noises that you think would distract. So for example, I have no idea what this will sound like for you, but for me, that doesn't sound like anything. But quite often, when you get that kind of paper rustling, those little noises, printers actually are really loud as well. They come across on the audio much differently. So something like a Rode, which is our funny ODE, lavalier mic, is a great starting point. The other one, and the one that I'm using right now, is a Blue Yeti. I'm going to hold it up for you. Let me see if I can actually get it there. So Blue Yeti. There's also a Snowball. Sorry, just making sure I didn't accidentally mute it while I put it back down. And again, this is great because I can use it for just interview me. It's small enough that I can, sorry, I don't interview myself, by the way. I can use it just like now, or I can take it with me and I can also interview other people with it if I know where I'm going. And it's well known, it's got a good reputation. You can do tons and tons of research and you will find loads of different views on what microphone to use, but go simple to begin with. There's also a Blue Snowball, which is another good start point. And I think that's more around the 50-pound mark. The Blue Yeti is around 120. The lavalier mics, I think we saw some for around 45, 50 pounds. But spend a little bit of money on it because that quality is important. And I know somebody I was speaking to a little while ago who was interviewing me actually using some lavalier mics, and they were a different brand. And the quality of the sound was more muted. It was kind of muffled all around. So it does make a difference. So those are the key things that I would start off with. You don't need a camera. If you're doing interviews remotely over Zoom or something, because you're not that concerned about the video, you can just use the video on your computer. That'll be absolutely fine. You don't need much of anything else. A pop filter is a good thing to have, and I'll show you kind of where that fits in if we end up with enough time for that. And then the other thing you need is software. And the best software to go with when you're starting is Audacity. Audacity is a free piece of software. Again, it's well known. It's used by a lot of people, you know, sort of professional voiceover artists as well as podcasters. And it allows you to both record and to edit your audio. It will also, which is quite a nice feature, and I think most of the audio apps on a desktop or a laptop will do this, is you can import a video in and it will strip the video out and leave you with the audio for you to be able to work on. So that makes things nice and easy if you've brought the audio in from, again, something like Zoom. When you're looking at Audacity, it does work on a Mac as well as on a Windows PC. but I have seen a few posts recently, and I'm sorry, I don't actually use a Mac anymore, but I think there might be a new operating system out of Catalina or something, and I don't know if it's working as well with that just now. So to definitely just check and make sure that it's running on your version of the app. You can also use Adobe Audition, which is what I tend to use now, largely because I have the Adobe Creative Cloud Suite anyway, so it made sense. If you're recording on your phone, just use the app that appears on your phone. So I have actually downloaded a couple. So I use either the Rode Reporter or Voice Recorder Pro. The free versions of them is absolutely fine, because generally what I found, and I'm sure sound engineers will tell us that no, it makes a huge difference, but for what most of us are trying to do, the quality that you want to worry about is that quality from the microphone, not it, what it records into doesn't matter so much. But I would save it as the largest file type you can. So when you're recording that initial audio, you want it to be a WAV file or similar, because those are the ones that, if you think of a photograph, where a photograph normally is taken on a camera, it's in a raw format, and there's like a ton of information about that image that's held in that file, and then you compress it down to a JPEG or a PNG or something like that. It's the same idea with audio. So you want to save it. So I'll say WAV because that's WAV, which is what I tend to do. And it's a nice big file. It's got lots of quality. And then we compress it down for actually putting it out for people to listen to. And when you're putting it out to the different podcast directories, you want it to be an MP3 file, because while MP3s are quite old, they are still the one that everybody can access. So there are newer ones that are compressed formats, but they aren't accessible necessarily on every device. So the MP3 is still the lowest common denominator. And it's good quality still. It's not that it's poor by any means. So start off with largest file possible, do your editing and whatnot, save it down to an MP3. Sorry, and I can see somebody's asked about subtitles, but Jonathan, I think you've asked that. Yeah, and YouTube will generate captions as well. So if you do put it onto YouTube, you can put subtitles on if that's what you're looking for as well. So I'm gonna skip over this one as well, on the basis of how do we actually get the podcast out there. So what you need to do with the podcast, there are a number of parts to it, and some of them are a one-off activity, so you just need to do it for the initial setup, and some are the things that you will do on a recurring basis. So one of the ones that you need to do to set up is to set up a podcast hosting service. There are loads of them. There's an ever increasing number of podcast hosting services. And what they do is they essentially provide a home for your podcast. And what they have is they say, okay, well, here's your address. This is where you live. So anybody who wants to find your podcast can come to this address, and they can check and see if anybody new is living here. And if somebody is living here, then I've got an address specific for them. So what they do with the hosting services is it generates something called an RSS file. And these have been around for ages, but basically it's a list, and you don't need to worry about any of the technical detail. All of the hosting services create it for you. All you need to know is that you're going to need an RSS, and it's a URL that you will provide. And what that does is every time you add a new episode in, it gets stored in your on your podcast host. They add it to your list, and the podcast directories, so Spotify, Podcast, Google, SoundCloud, Acast, TuneIn, all of the umpteen of them that are out there, check, going, is there anything new? Is there anything new? So you probably can't see because I'm looking at a different screen, but I'm moving my mouse back and forth. So they are constantly checking to see if there's another episode out there. And when there is, they make it available to your listeners. And a lot of people actually, a lot of applications do still use Apple to source the podcasts that they list. Other ones like Spotify, you have to go in and you actually have to tell it individually that you're there. So step number one is you've got your hosting service. You have to have at least one podcast episode on there before you go off and you tell all of these other directories and services that you exist. Once they know that you exist, they then keep checking to see if there's anything new coming back. So you, on a regular basis, will create the audio. You'll generally create some graphics. So you'll have an image, which is your overall show cover. So if you think of it as an album cover, and you will also then have some episode covers. So for each particular episode, it'll say, you know, okay, well, this one was Deborah and she was talking to Jonathan. So that's the cover for this particular episode. Put together some show notes, and the show notes help people to find it, as well as providing them with an idea of what's actually in that one. You know, so they might have a little read and go, yeah, I actually do want to listen to this. And I'm trying to think about the other bits. Normally you have the intro and the outro as well, and that's a combination of music with normally a little voiceover. If you think about the radio again, you've been listening to, you know, Heart, so that type of thing, as well as a little introduction to that particular episode. You may or may not need that depending on your podcast. That may not be relevant. You might be able to just have the little introduction music and straight into it. The introduction music is not mandatory, but it does make a big difference to how your podcast sounds. And the same at the end, having a little outro, you know, okay, you've been listening to Deborah Levitt, all of that sort of thing. Put all of those together into one file, give it to your podcast host, and again, it gets picked up by the directories. I'm going to just see, I've got 3 minutes I can see. I can see a question here, but do you have to list your podcast with each directory? It depends, and I'm sorry, that's a very vague answer, but it really does depend. Spotify, yes, you need to go into Spotify and submit it. Apple, yes, you need to go into there to, I think it's iTunes Connect, something like that. I've got a URL somewhere. Google will pick it up, but you can submit it. Acast, TuneIn, Deezer, you need to submit to. Some of the other apps will pick it up automatically. So I know that my podcast is on at least 16 or 17 at the moment. Some of those I haven't submitted to. They've just been picked up automatically. So get them on the main ones so that you know that they're out there. And then just if you see a new app come out, then, you know, just go ahead and check and see what it is that they need to have your podcast. Because podcasts are becoming so big, basically, they are a part of the way people are communicating now. The way that we submit to these other apps is getting easier. You know, Spotify, when I first did mine, I think it took me about 3 tries. It would disappear into a black hole, and then eventually they got around to going, oh yeah, you're a podcast, sure, we'll put you on. Now they've got a whole new podcaster forum, I suppose, where you can go into, and literally when I've done it for some clients, it's been within hours. So I've submitted it, 3 or 4 hours later, it's up and available on Spotify from that first one. So it's amazing. So I know that there has been a lot of information very fast. Excuse me as I scroll through, you can see that we're missing some things. But just as we're coming to that 10-minute mark, there are, sorry, I came out of that a little bit quicker than I meant to. Yes, if you are interested in a podcast yourself, then there are a couple of options. You can either sign up for the 5-day podcast challenge. It's completely free. As you might expect, it takes 5 days, and it takes you through everything that you need to do. And by the end of it, if you followed all the steps, you will be able to launch your podcast onto Apple. If you want to talk about it a little bit more, if you want to just, think through some more, and I know a few of you said that you're thinking about it, but not sure what, then you can book, again, a call with me. So just a 20-minute call. We can have a chat about, what a podcast would mean for you and how it might fit in with what you're trying to do. So hopefully that hasn't just overwhelmed you with too much information very quickly.
Well, thanks very much, Deborah. I mean, it's certainly given you a real, so I'll put myself back here again. Yeah, people a real, I think, flavor of it. And certainly, I think, because we've had the opportunity of Oh yes, actually, someone's asked, could you put the links back up on screen of what your
Yes.
challenge was?
Sorry, bear with me just a second. It's sharing the wrong screen for me. Hang on. Let me just swap those around. There we go. I think, can you see them now?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, as I say, and certainly what I've found from, say, our previous conversation and listening to it today, it's one of those things. I think, you know, probably the best place for a lot of people to start is to go and do a bit of research and, like you say, and listen to what other people are doing, isn't it? It's probably a good way of getting some initial ideas as to what's possible. Because I think that's probably one of the challenges people have, is that going, have they got an idea for a podcast, and sort of, is it a big enough idea, you know, that you know it's going to be sustainable, isn't it? Because I think that's people's main concern, is thinking, yes, I can think of the first 5 or 10 episodes, but after that I'm going to go a bit blank. But I guess researching what other people are doing is a great way to do it.
Well, and also if you do have an idea and you can only see 5 or 10 episodes, there's no reason that you can't do a podcast that is 5 or 10 episodes, that you could say, actually, I just am going to talk about this.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's essentially an educational thing, maybe, or, well, it doesn't even have to be educational, but setting that expectation with people that, you know, this is what it's about. There's no reason that you couldn't do just that one-off series. And then you might find that you can, so I've just seen another request for the, can you see the link again? I've just seen somebody else asking for it, but hopefully they're there. But yeah, it's just setting people's expectations. And you might go, okay, well, actually, my first thing is going to be about you know, marketing. So you might say, Jonathan, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a podcast and it's all about Facebook ads. And it's just going to be 10 episodes, which are telling people, you know, how to do their first set of Facebook ads and really helping them to understand and build all of that up. And that just takes you those 10 episodes. Then you might go, well, actually, now people are asking me for something more detailed. And therefore, I'm going to do another 10, which are more detailed, or maybe I'm going to talk about how to do it on LinkedIn, or, you know, something else which builds on your areas of expertise. So yeah, so no reason not to, but knowing that in advance is useful.
No, like I said, it's a great way of looking at it and seeing it. Okay, well, thank you so much for that, and apologies to everyone that could make it, and apologies to those who. I really do not know what happened with Zoom. We've been running these things every Monday, and they've gone absolutely fine. But today was a bit of a nightmare. But anyway, thanks very much indeed. And if anybody wants to get in touch with Deborah, you can always email myself as well, Jonathan@bismosis.com, or just go to bismosis.co.uk. And we'll be happy to answer your questions. And as I say, I will try. Normally we keep the recordings of these sessions for our members, but obviously because of the little technical challenges, we'll make this one sort of publicly available. So I'll do a bit of editing on this, put it together. Anyway, so thank you very much indeed, once again, Deborah. And yeah, anybody got any follow-up questions, do get in touch. All right.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. And I'll look forward to catching up with people next Monday, when hopefully we'll be slightly more glitch-free. Okay. Thanks very much. Have a great afternoon.